Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Hari. I'm from Difenda. My role here at Difenda is Senior Director of Sales and Marketing Enablement. And today we're going to be talking about Microsoft solutions and Difenda solutions for MDR for OT and how it pertains to IT and OT security. So welcome, everyone. Buckle up for the next 45 minutes. And if you have any questions, as was pointed out, please don't hesitate to throw them in. We're happy to field those questions as we go. In terms of today's agenda, just a few things we want to cover. Obviously, I'm going to introduce our speakers today, and then we'll talk a little bit about the differences between OT and IT security, just to introduce the topic. We'll also expand a little bit on environment threat landscape in OT environments and how we specifically handle the OT lifecycle and in terms of cybersecurity. Lastly, we'll head into talking about an environmental assessment model that we use to better understand environments as we help consult and provide security architecture consultation around OT. And of course, lastly but not least, we're actually going to spend some time today walking through a real example and having a look with some hands-on keyboard in terms of a technical demo for an OT attack. So that is to say, we're going to learn a lot about operational technology networks and security. And without further ado, I'm going to begin introducing our speakers today. So first, I'd like to introduce Richard Diver from Microsoft, Senior Technology Business Development Manager, Microsoft. Hello, Richard. And also I'm introducing today Sheldon Shaw of Difenda, Director of Research and Response Team. Hello, Sheldon. These folks and myself, we're going to be leading you through today's conversation, so please don't hesitate to point your questions to any one of us or to all of us in the group, and we'll go from there. I'm just going to keep going. In terms of introducing Difenda, who we are a managed cybersecurity services provider that's been in business since 2008. Our historical sort of culture and where we've come from has started out in the consulting and advisory world, and we moved into managed security services in about 2013 and have been offering managed detection and response and similar services since then. Our specialty up until recently has been in IT, but we've expanded to leverage the Microsoft Security Suite to provide our services on the OT side of things as well. Obviously, this is a new and emerging market in terms of where not only Microsoft is going, but the entire industry is going, and we believe it's certainly a key facet for securing enterprises of the future. In terms of our recognition, we've been recognized by various institutions, research firms, and of course awards for our product suite. And what's perhaps more important than that is our folks are highly certified, not just in the Microsoft certifications, but across the board with industry standards like SOC 2 and ISO. So in terms of our expertise, we do have the capability and the experience, and so we'll get right into how we leverage all of that and provide solutions to our customers. Before I do, I'm going to turn it over to Richard for a moment, and we'd like to introduce the topic of the operational technology environment threat landscape, where we're coming from and where we're headed to. Over to you, Richard.
Hey, thank you, Jamie, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody on the call. So yeah, with Difenda for IoT really came about because Microsoft has already been in the IT, OT world for a long time, just not always known about it, especially in IoT is the idea that more and more devices are becoming smart, connected to the internet. Why does that matter in the OT world? In the OT world, it really has been a case of isolation has been the main layer of defense. If the network isn't connected to the internet, that isolation from physical boundaries prevents it from being as open to an attacker as maybe other corporate IT environments are. As time goes by, though, especially in the last maybe 5-10 years, you see more and more companies realizing they need to connect some of those networks in order to either get remote access for support purposes or to get updates to do from the internet. They also need to be able to have third-party companies help them monitor, manage, maintain their equipment. And just from the business smarts of being able to say, what's actually happening with my equipment? How well is it producing? And it's all about operational and safety mechanisms. Now, if you're not monitoring that remotely, then you're relying on people that are on site. And so it's down to, again, how many people you can have. And that's a huge resource problem for the whole world of IT. So the attack landscape is shifting, and we see that sometimes the OT world is the direct target, and other times IT is the target, but it can end up impacting the OT world as well. So we need to take this approach of making sure that that doesn't happen, and where it does happen, we want to know about it as soon as we can and take appropriate actions on it. I spoke to a couple of companies recently. One of them managed to deploy vibration sensors. It's a good story. So 2,000 vibration sensors sent around their entire production plant, which spanned acres of land, to see if the machinery was vibrating in a bad way. Obviously, they do make some movements, but not too much. They didn't connect it to the network. So now you have somebody with a clipboard, maybe an iPad, some kind of device, walking around 2,000 individual devices, reading out the sensor readings for the last 24 hours, and then recording that manually and reporting it back. So by the time they've done all 2,000, they're starting again at the beginning. And that's tedious. Not only is it tedious, it's also from a time perspective. By the time you realize that trend analysis of what's happened, it could already be too late. So the investment they spent in buying these brand new devices, but not connecting them, just puts them in a slightly better position than they were in before, but nowhere near the level of potential it could have had should those things been recording 24/7 into some central dashboard. You're going to see more and more examples of that come up as companies go through modernization, especially as the OT industry starts to build new defenses, new capabilities. They will naturally expect some level of internet connectivity in order to accelerate business growth as well. COVID-19 obviously had some impact as well for some companies, immediately implementing some kind of remote capabilities through things like remote desktop, not the most secure way of doing it, maybe a VPN. We've seen attacks against VPN being very successful, and generally a lot of IT access into OT to allow a laptop or mobile phone, whatever it might be, to get into these. So look out for them, ask yourselves and your customers exactly what has changed in the last couple of years, what's going to change soon. And when you come to that awareness that you need to start monitoring and protecting these devices, patching, unfortunately, isn't the only way we can do it. We can't always upgrade the operating systems. And so a network-based approach is what we're taking with this. So that's really the landscape of where we're at. Now, do I have another slide to talk to, or are we going to hand to Sheldon?
Sheldon, perhaps if you would like, what we'll now do is we'll turn it over to you, and you can maybe talk us through a little bit about what just happened in terms of the transition from cyber physical, and maybe now talk about the OT life cycle and how our approach and sort of our processes build on top of that.
Sure, thank you. So what we like to do before we start to install any sort of software or hardware is we like to focus on the left-hand side of this cycle. So I like to think about this as good day, bad day scenarios. So what would be a good day is you understand your threats, your vulnerabilities, the impact assessments. But contrary to that, what are the bad days? So high consequence events. What would be a drastic change in the network or in the OT manufacturing floor that would cause your company a lot of concern? So that's where we start. We go through and we analyze all of those. We do interviews. We do what's considered a crown jewel or an impact assessment. And then we start to write out the detections, the responses, and the recovery playbooks. So from there, you can move to the right, you get into your security architecture, you can start to observe some of the security situations, some of the IT and IoT fit assessments. And what we want to do is move over to asset discovery. So with the OT sensor, you're able to get an online, very quick assessment of how many devices you have, what is the version, how long ago were they patched, things like that. And from there, we can start to develop custom playbooks. We can say, look, this is the sort of network that you have. These are the devices. Here are the vulnerabilities. We work with the client to say, is there a competitive intelligence angle? Do you know any threat actors that potentially would be looking at you? Build out all those scenarios. And if you are a 24/7, 365 client, then you have remote incident response, you have threat actor tracking, things like that. So that's that whole security OT lifecycle that we like to work with clients with.
Thank you, Sheldon. Richard, I'm going to turn it back to you. And now, so we've sort of understood the idea of where the problems are in the landscape. We've understood sort of what our approach is to sort of understanding those crown jewels and going from there. I'll turn it back over to you, Richard. Now, if you want to maybe tell us a little bit about the Microsoft side of the products and architecture that supports us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So one of the models that we adopted pretty quickly from at least an architecture and discussion perspective is the Purdue model, which is a safety system, a way of looking at OT networks to understand which layers are we talking about. So as you can see from this model, if we look at the bottom layer first, that's layer 0, This is where things actually happen. This is where things can be destructive and life-threatening, but this is where temperatures are changed. This is where doors might be open, valves changed. It can be a complete range of systems that need to actually do something in the physical world. So at that layer, most of these things are connected then to process controllers. Layer 1, this is where we start to look at what is happening at layer 1. What are the commands being sent to it? What's the level of patching? We want to make sure if there are any vulnerabilities in different systems, and we have telemetry and diagnostics for all of the different protocols out there. And if you don't have the protocol enabled, you can write your own. So you may have bespoke and proprietary software that's been created by your own company anywhere in the world. We can help you build logic for the lesser known non-public versions. So at that layer 1, these control units really are the first layer of logic where an attacker could get to carry out direct attacks. Above that, in layer 2, the supervisory layer is the most likely area that we're going to see things like malware, viruses, scanning, activities that are very much on a malware perspective, which is going to try to get down to layer 1. So we start looking at the networks on both layers 1 and 2, and then up into 3 or 3.5. All of these layers, we're looking at all the network traffic. What devices are talking to which devices? What are they trying to do? Are they sending commands? Are they sending stop commands? Are they changing firmware upgrades during the middle of the day? Exactly what's happening. Are we seeing passwords transfer across in plain text? Anything that could lead to potential vulnerabilities and attacker and liabilities. Really, as well, what we're looking for is how do the different networks talk to each other? So as we not just scan one network, we want to try to scan every network available, all subnets and segments, to see, is it from jumping from one building or site to another building and site? Are we seeing that communications? Or is it coming from what's layer 4 and 5, which is IT and then the internet? Are we seeing IT and remote access coming through those firewalls and into the OT environment? And if we see that, we want to call that out and say, is that known, is it expected, and is it safe and trusted? So those devices should be fully protected with endpoint detection and response, multi-factor authentication, VPNs should be certificate-based. There's a lot of layers of protection we can do in layers 4 and 5 to prevent access into anything lower than 3, 2, and 1. But we still want to monitor the behaviors and call out when we see things happen. To do that, we have a couple of different solutions. The main one is known as Microsoft's Defend for IoT, and that is a range of solutions that can work both into devices themselves with an agent or network-based, where we're actually just looking at network traffic and detecting activities and behaviors on the traffic. All of that information is then packaged up and sent to either OT or IT SOC Center with the existing SIM solutions, or Microsoft has something called Microsoft Sentinel, which is a SIM in the cloud, and that allows you to deploy and connect all these systems regardless of whatever else you have on premises. And we see more and more companies adopting the cloud. Even in the OT world, we do see a trend that in the next couple of years, more companies will have some kind of cloud estate connected to their on-premises OT environment. And so we're getting ahead of that game and making sure that our systems work both on-premises if necessary and are ready for the cloud when the customer's ready to take that journey as well. I think that pretty much covers it. I'll hand back to you, Jamie, to get on with some demos, because I'm really looking forward to seeing this in action.
Thank you, Richard. Absolutely. That's absolutely the next step. What we're going to do now is, Sheldon, I'm going to turn it back over to you. We're going to talk through a scenario. So, Sheldon, if you wouldn't mind first introduce sort of what the environment is we're talking about in the scenario, and then we'll go from there. All right. Thank you, Sheldon.
All right, perfect. So just like the slide that Richard was presenting, it's really important to understand, layer 1 and layer 2 and what's happening. There is a lot of cross-pollination between the IT and the OT networks. So in order to do that today, we're going to mock up a virtual kind of OT situation. So on the right-hand side, we have, on the left-hand side, we have some corporate workstations, and then on the right-hand side, we have the engineering workstation, we have the SCADA, and we have the PLC. So for SCADA, we're emulating it. We're using SCADA BR, and for the PLC, we're using Modbus PAL. So we're able to emulate all of the Modbus communications. And what we're going to do today is we're going to simulate the change in temperature of a tank. So this could be a power plant. This could be anywhere. We've chosen to call it a beer manufacturing facility. And so when you change the temperature of the tank, it changes the properties, obviously, of the ingredients, and essentially, in this case, ruins the batch of beer, which is horrible. But you could portray this as anything you would like. So we have a little animation here that you can let roll. And so what we're going to do is we're going to send a PDF. This PDF is actually a Modbus PDF with some malware in it. So it actually makes it through the corporate firewall, ends up on the engineering workstation because that engineer is aware that they're using Modbus, and he or she needs to understand a few intricacies of it. So they double click on it, and now they're exposed. And so this creates a reverse shell that is encrypted, and the IT network really can't see it too well. And so the attacker can now take a look at the SCADA system and then figure out which PLCs are out there and devise their attack. So instead of doing this live, which never really works out too well, we've recorded a few videos. So as we roll this through, I'm going to explain what we're doing in the videos. On the left-hand side, as the video is playing, you're going to see the MITRE attack. So on the first case, you're going to see user execution. The attacker is now on the system. They're able to see that the Modbus PAL PDF was executed. Now they're going to run a very common command like netstat, and they're going to try to figure out what's exactly on the network. I'm a little bit of ahead, so they've now got their shell. Now they're doing netstat. Very common. Typically, you're not going to see that trigger too many alerts or alarms, either in the IoT sensor, or even on Defender for Endpoint. So now they're enumerating the network and finding out where all the good stuff is. So they're seeing all the communication. They can see the ports that are open. Fairly standard stuff. We'll just let this roll out a little bit more. So now going into a very common tactic, they're going to take a copy of the screen when they can see it. All right, so they've noticed, okay, the temperature's at 50, and they're just going to remember what that engineering workstation looks like. So the set point is 50. We're going to attempt to change the temperature here in a minute. Okay, so they have a screenshot now. And you can see now that we've gone into network connection enumeration and discovery. All right, now we're going to do some network sniffing. We have to find out what are the other devices there. We're doing a little bit of a scan. And unfortunately, in this case, when we ran the scan, we were a little bit too loud. Therefore, it triggered an alert. And you can see, I think you can see the port scan detected there, yeah. Lesson, always scan less ports and less machines. So now you can see the types of ports. So 445, so you've got an SMB open. 502, you have Modbus that's open. 3389, you have RDP, but in this case, we're definitely looking for the Modbus. So now we're going to try to figure out what we can run against this network. So we're doing some common attacks that will get picked up by the sensor. So I think the first one was Eternal Blue. So the sensor is going to start to carry off some alarms here. And you can see the alarms that are coming up. So we're a little bit too loud, so we send an invalid SMB message. And then there looks like it's a NotPetya malware being run. So the attacker is just trying all the ways that they can to try to get into the network. So in this case, we are going to dig into the alert a little bit so that we can see it. And if you book a demo at the end of this session, we'll be able to go through this in a live situation and go through it a little bit more slowly. But for the purposes of today, we're going to go quite quickly. So now we're going to look for remote service, lateral movement, try to move around a little bit. Try to be a little bit quiet so the sensor doesn't pick us up. All right, so now we're going to move into the final stage of the attack. We kind of know what's going on in the network. We found some PLCs. Now we're going to target over Modbus one of those PLCs, see what we can do. So we have to execute a few commands against it to see what's happening. This one threw an exception. So again, what you want to do, and I mean, obviously this demo isn't about how to avoid the IoT sensor, it's about how to get picked up by it. But we do note that there are some ways that you can be a little bit more quiet. But in this case, we're going to go through and attack that PLC. We're going to try to issue it a few commands, see which ones that it's waiting for. So we got a positive response on Modbus over TCP on 1, 3, 4. So we will go back in, we'll let this run all the way through. So now we know what it's listening for and potential commands. All right. So that whole activity created a little bit of noise. So if you are in the SOC right now, you're definitely aware something is going on. There's lots of alarms going off. Somebody's trying to interact with that PLC. And that comes down to understanding the business use as well, because potentially, there could be reasons why this would be happening. But understanding both the business and the security reasons of or consequences of the network is pretty important. We're going to let this run. So now we're going to go in so you can see what are the different sort of parameters that we can pass to that PLC. There we go. We were able to pass it a new parameter, and we will eventually see the temperature go past its set point. We are going to add in 5,000, which should change it by 5 degrees. There you go. Value has changed. Now the temperature is rising. So the set point's 55, was 50, and now we're hitting 55. So that essentially would change the temperature of that pot and probably ruin whatever's in that batch. So one of the things in the business use right now, when we interview the fictional engineer in this situation, we can decide that certain IPs should never have connectivity to that PLC. So we can go in and create a business rule for that. So that's a pretty cool thing that we can do in the IoT sensor. And again, that comes down to the importance of sitting down and understanding what are all the business uses of that manufacturing plant. So I think we can go. We've already played that out. So now what's really important is that you can see the IT security evolution as well as the IoT security evolution. And when you push all of those up into Sentinel, that's where you can start to see these. And you can trace back the attacks, because what happened is it was a purely IT attack. So we sent in some malware over via PDF. And so we want to be able to see the two of those. So we can go to the next one. So here's what happens when we pass it up to Sentinel. So we don't have all of the IT alerts in here. We're just passing the IoT alert up, but you can dig into the alert right now along the side. You can expand this out, uncover more of the details, and start your investigation. So you can start to see where the data came from. You can see the times, you can see the IPs, and it all came down. Okay, I think that's it for it playing. Oh, here we go. So there you can go in, create your own custom alerts based on the activity that you've seen so that it doesn't happen again, and you can tighten up your security defenses. Along the side, again, we were at tactic exploitation of a remote service. This is where we were sending it illegal function code. So we were sending commands that it was not ready for, and it tripped an alarm. You can assign this to an owner for follow-up investigation. You can save it. You can build a playbook. So what are the responses that you're supposed to do? That's what we're doing right now, taking a look at all the entities.
All right. Thank you, Sheldon.
Thank you.
So I think, obviously, from a demo perspective, I think it was important to cover also how we framed or communicated. Can you maybe walk us through a little bit just in terms of the ICS and why we use that MITRE ATT&CK framework?
Yeah, just like IT attacks, we're obviously usually trying to overlay it over the MITRE ATT&CK. So with this situation for ICS, it's really important for our clients to be able to understand where we are. So on the left-hand side, you have the execution initial access. A lot of time is spent in discovery. So a lot of these attackers will come in, not necessarily know exactly what the PLCs are doing. So you'll see a lot of those random errors, which is somewhat noisy, but in an OT environment, there could be a lot of that happening. There could be a few errors in IT systems. You obviously see that. A little bit of collection, but again, a lot of discovery. Impair process, so modify that parameter. So the further you move right on that ICS attack framework, it's pretty concerning. So you got to make sure that you have all of those tightened up. So modify parameter, unauthorized command message, those are things you really want to trigger in, and those should be escalated as critical alerts.
Thank you, Sheldon. So I do have a couple of quick questions that I think are relevant, and then what we'll do is in the meantime, we'll turn the floor over to everyone who's attending today. If you have any questions, either about what you saw in the demo just now or about operational technology security in general, please drop those into the chat. In the meantime, I'm going to ask Sheldon, so obviously this is a description of a particular attack that we saw today, but can you maybe articulate or help me understand a little bit about 0-day in terms of we don't necessarily always have a signature or a planned playbook for what the next thing will be. So can you help us understand a little bit about how 0 days are handled in OT networks?
Well, the first thing you have to do is get a baseline for all of your protocols. So in this situation, this network only used Modbus over TCP, but there may be other protocols in other networks. But we baseline the system for between 48 hours and 2 weeks, and so there's an expectation. There's a learning for the network, and from there we can uncover abnormalities in the network. So we would drill into any of those abnormalities and investigate those. We would then sit down and talk to the engineers and find out if there's a business reason. If there isn't, then potentially you have a problem. But there is no magic solution for 0-day exploits. The only thing you can do is really have continuous monitoring. And I would say from all the attacks that are happening around the world, and as well as in conflict regions, what we know is the lack of continuous monitoring will put you in a difficult position. And that's why we're really seeing an uptick in conversations around how do we deploy Defender for IoT.
That makes good sense. Thank you, Sheldon. And to that point, in terms of the types of devices that we can support, Richard, maybe I'll turn it over to you. Can you help us better understand what types of OT assets that the Microsoft suite can power, and vice versa, of course, help us with in MDR services?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the demonstration. It's really good to see it actually in action. And I think as much as we talk about 0-day attacks, a lot of these are not even 0-day. I put in the chat window. This can take weeks and months. They can slowly get in there and look around and attack. So we're looking for obviously anything Windows and Linux. That's an obvious attack surface for any attacker. But we're really looking at things like PLC state changes. One of those is the ability to see if the key has been switched from read-only run mode, which is what it should be in, to program mode or remote access mode. And this is a disaster for a lot of areas because that means that, yes, remotely, your engineers have a great time to be able to do things without having to travel to site physically, but then so does the attacker. So, yeah, we're looking at not only on the OT side, but very soon you'll see we'll bring out new technologies are going to look on the IT side as well and say, what if the attacker came in through some kind of exploit in a printer or a coffee machine? Or you've seen other examples in the world where maybe it was a Bluetooth device connected to a fish tank, and through that fish tank, somebody's able to get remote access into the network. From that network, they then obviously get into whatever databases and sensitive information they have. Another good example of this isn't just hardcore OT environments like manufacturing and industrial, but also something like the HVAC system. So we have seen companies implementing a HVAC system inside of a normal shopping center maybe, and then from there connecting that to the same network that the till systems might be on, or through some kind of misconfiguration and exploits, getting from that HVAC system and getting into the till system, the financial system, shouldn't be allowed. But this is why we need to do these assessments. By, as Sheldon said, within 24 hours, 48 hours, we can tell you where the most weak points are that could be exploited. Long before we look for activities of, is somebody actually doing something today? We want to say, what could it look like? What does bad day look like to us? And how would they do it? And then it's almost like doing red team exercises without having to send the red team in. Maybe that's something you follow up with later, is once you've got your lockdowns and you've got your protections in place and you're monitoring 24/7, you might then want to actually get somebody to go and test your security and see what they could do with it. So from a devices perspective, it's really almost anything. There's some caveats. So there are some very special devices that are like in the medical world. We can certainly detect all of the networking and all of the connectivity between devices. But if you get down to the exactly how does this specific medical device work, we have some partner solutions there that we would look into for something extremely specific. But generally what we're looking at, most of the attackers also don't know how to attack that stuff yet. There are some great people at Black Hat that know how to do this, but in general we're seeing it's the normal building management systems, something that does heating and cooling, something that is looking after turning, again in a hospital environment, liquid oxygen into gas. Those are all processes used by things like PLCs and other controllers that are critical to the running of a business or running of any kind of facility that isn't looked after today by IT, the SOC team, and all of their fantastic tools they've built over the last 20 years to protect us from cybersecurity. This is a whole separate world that isn't being looked at yet by many of these teams.
Thank you, Richard. That's a good point. Obviously, one of the things that we saw very recently was the announcement of something called Pipedream, which is sort of, to the best of my understanding, if you think about it like an exploit kit. So everything that a would-be script kiddie or hacker would want to get a quick start into their OT hacking game. And so, Sheldon, I do want to open it up to the floor real quick, just so everyone is aware. You are able to raise your hand as well using the Teams feature if you have a question. Otherwise, you can certainly put it in the chat. But Sheldon, I do want to turn it over to you and just sort of ask a question around Pipedream, which is, again, this ICS-focused exploit kit, for lack of a better term. Can you help us understand what the potential impacts could be, or sort of how that prefab weaponized ICS exploit kit can be leveraged, and how it would impact organizations today?
Yeah, I like the way Richard frames it, that sometimes we become enamored with what's in the media. So if we look at, and it doesn't matter what name we call them, but if you look at the first version of InDestroyer, and then you look at the second version of it, the second version of it was very tailored. They knew a lot more about the network. They knew a lot more about what commands were expected. So in my mind, while it doesn't get as much fanfare, it's much more dangerous, because you can see in the demo that we did that we were pretty loud. Again, as Richard said, we could have spent 3 months on the network, issuing it one command at a time, staying underneath the sensor for as long as possible, and then attacking it. And that's the most dangerous thing. There is a lot of fanfare around it. I think, we're going to continue to see these exploit frameworks. They've been around for a bit. The consequences to what can happen in an OT network obviously can be a little bit more significant to even catastrophic. And that's really where we're focusing right now, is how can we do the full-time monitoring, have those conversations, have those business conversations, and then make sure that, if the protocol is supposed to do something, that if there's any outside of that bandwidth or that trend line, we need to make sure that we're investigating it. And you'll also run into a lot of people that say, well, I'm not connected to the IT network. There's always a situation or always a way that you can get in. That's either a supply chain attack or USB, or there's always going to be connectivity at some point. And so we probably won't see these frameworks go away.
Thank you, Sheldon. So my next question, again for you, Sheldon, if I may, just in terms of if I'm an organization thinking today and I don't necessarily know where I'm starting, my OT environment is maybe not as well understood. Can you help me understand from an OT security assessment standpoint, what are some of the initial outputs that someone might expect to get from that? What are the business value, certainly, but also the technical outputs and how that would help me inform my strategy?
I think the first part is always about the business output. It's how many devices do I have on my network? And even in IT, we struggle with that. There's new devices being added to the network, all the time. Maybe OT is a little bit slower. You won't know until you start to monitor it. So the biggest output you get right away is, what do I have on my network? What are the versions? And are they vulnerable? So that's the first part. We can then do a tabletop exercise by moving things around electronically. We can say, look, this is where you're most vulnerable. If we were an attacker, this is where we would come in and attack. Then protocol analysis, make sure that everything is working well. We talk about that left-hand side of that maturity cycle, sitting down and what does a bad consequence day look like? And then we engineer everything towards that. So within 48 hours or maybe a little bit more, you have a very good understanding of what your network looks like. You can move things around without affecting the network in terms of tabletop exercise or wargaming or red teaming the network. So you get a lot of value right out of the gate. And those interviews, while we sometimes cast them to the side, that's what really makes these security systems work, is having an understanding of what does the network do, what is it supposed to do.
That's a good point. And Sheldon, you talked about understanding some of that vulnerability, asset vulnerability information, as well as some of that discovery. Richard, if I could get you maybe to elaborate in terms of what Defender for IoT Hub and some of those capabilities allow us to do with, obviously at the very beginning, do network traffic analysis for discovering assets. Is there anything else that you can help us understand around either understanding the asset in the environment or sort of enumerating or sort of quantifying the vulnerabilities on those, and how Microsoft helps us do that?
Yeah, we have a team called Section 52, and they also work with our extended threat research team called Mystic, the Microsoft threat intelligence team. Between them, we have petabytes of data about the internet as well, and we're learning more every single day about what attacker infrastructure looks like. So when we build those assessments on the sensor itself, this is why we can do things within 24, 48 hours. As long as we have the data coming in, we can immediately analyze it. Is we're looking for, what is the list of all of the things we hear from, say, Rockwell, Schneider Electric, and a bunch of other companies that they have CVEs, they have known vulnerabilities, and you haven't patched against those? And then what kind of ports and protocols are being left open? What communications can we see? All the way to what kind of thing would be weird, like DHCP and SMB. That's not the normal kind of traffic in an OT network. Now, maybe you have a mixed environment. Maybe you have IT work happening at the same time as OT work, and it's mixed. Again, like you said, that's why you need to have some people look at the data to make sure, is this normal? Is this normal for this environment? And then on top of that, we actually run assessments. So what we're doing is we're taking the data inside of the sensor and saying, let's run some what-if scenarios. And then that way we can actually build out a mapping of, well, if this PC was the one that got attacked, this has access to all of these areas. And so then we can mark that as a high risk for your environment. And this way you can put more monitoring. Now, with the breadth of Microsoft solutions, what we can do is bring that data into Sentinel and look at, well, what do we see on the firewalls? What do we see in identity? Can we track Richard logging in from his van in the middle of nowhere on his laptop through 5G networks, in through the VPN, or through an RDP server to remotely control a PLC? If we can track that end to end, we can know that that's normal behavior versus that's not accepted. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. We've got protocols that prevent that kind of activity, but somehow they've found a backdoor in, or they're doing things to be more streamlined in their administration. And we've seen it with security guards bringing an Xbox or a PlayStation into the security, and they want to get internet connectivity so they can play games, or they want to watch YouTube. they find a way. And this is the problem with a lot of networks, is they're not what you think they are, because your design and your implementation is one thing, but how it actually looks like is completely different. So we're constantly upgrading those threats and defenses. We're taking real life scenarios where our Dart team is out in the field actually responding to threats against many different types of customers, unfortunately. They're very busy, and our partners, and we get feedback from the entire industry on what's happening in that world, and we add that back into our telemetry to make sure, again, if you're cloud connected and getting the latest and greatest data all the time, you're going to see it as soon as the world knows about that threat. We're going to be able to push it down to the sensor and tell you about it. If you're running an offline network, you can manually go and gather that information and install it. In theory, you're at less risk in an offline network, but no one's offline anymore. So it's an interesting world. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens next, but all I know is we need to start looking at these networks and start to monitor them, and then start to think about how do we actually protect or respond when they're under threat.
I couldn't agree more, Richard. And thank you, Richard, and thank you, Sheldon. We are just about out of time for today, so I do want to just sort of wrap up by saying a couple of things. First of all, thank you again for taking the time to join us on our presentation today. If you do have any subsequent questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us, sales@difenda.com or otherwise. But more importantly, if you do have an OT network or even OT assets within your sort of mixed IT-OT environment, don't just sort of assume and hesitate. Wait to find out what happens. Certainly do an assessment, better understand those assets, and we're certainly happy to help with that. And to that point, if you are interested in seeing a more hands-on customized demo, don't hesitate to go to difenda.com/demo and book a demo there. The first 5 attendees to do that will receive a Microsoft gift card, but more importantly, you'll obviously receive some insight into your OT networks and how we can help you secure those. The other piece of sort of housekeeping that I wanted to provide is we do have a QR code for a survey. So if you are able to scan that, we'd love to hear some more feedback about today's presentation. As well, just as I mentioned, here's our contact information. Reach out to either your Microsoft representative or to us or to both. And really don't wait to see what happens with OT networks and all of Pipedream's unfortunate impacts. But thank you to everyone who was able to attend from Difenda.